Hello, this is Chris Jansen. Welcome to the End Evil podcast.
So this little talk is about the problem and prioritization. What are our priorities in this experience, in this life, with this time we have? As I'm walking along the river, pretty beautiful and peaceful, serene place I find myself in. And part of my mind says, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's awesome. But we're talking about bigger picture stuff. I think it's very possible, even in a pretty evil world, for there to be pockets of freedom and pockets of beauty. I tend to think that nature itself, the nature of the universe even, is one of growth and beauty and joy. But there's also plenty of space in this reality for misery, sadness, anxiety, depression, violence, death, rape, and all that too. And that's the part of it that, this discussion is working on. And I think for some people, having any discussion on that is useless. But I want to kind of go into why it's not useless to discuss difficult topics. So the question kind of is, what, if anything, can us individuals do about the bigger picture issues? And what am I talking about? The bigger picture issues. Let's just say we made a list of problems in the world that humanity faces. And for a moment, let's just put aside our relationship with the planet, for instance, is pretty important. How we treat nature, how we treat the elements around us, how we relate to nature, that's super important. But just for the sake of this conversation, kind of want to concentrate a little bit on human to human relationships and what our priority is in the big picture. Okay, so you look at humanity, we know that all through history there's been different styles of rulership. We had kings, and we had years of different kind of religious rulership, like the Catholic Church. We had all through history ruled by force. The biggest fist, the biggest army, the biggest terror, on the planet was able to push around the defenseless, basically. The people that didn't have the tools to defend themselves, the wherewithal, the network, teamwork, the ability to know that what was going on around them, whatever. People couldn't do much about it for many years. Then we come along to the point in history where technology keeps bringing new weapons of war, new tools, new weapons of destruction. And finally we come across the gun, right? The great evener. And what's interesting about the gun is, for the first time in history, like an 8-year-old can defeat the most buffed, axe-wielding, strong Viking guy just by pulling his finger. Trick, boom. Doesn't matter how good you are with a sword or an axe. This little kid's got a gun pointed at your head and he pulls the trigger. That's going to do it, So what that does is even out the playing field in a lot of ways in the world. And so politics came in a new way. Not to say there wasn't politics before, but politics of leadership, of ownership changed. So I think what that basically means is that it makes it really hard for someone to, old school style, just be like, I'm the king of this land and I own everything within these walls, because all it takes is a group of people with guns that don't like it that way or don't like that guy. And it's just a matter of time, if they really want to, they can take him out. So, like that old style of ruling, it just can't even work anymore because of the technology and the way the world has changed in that way. Some small group of 10 9-year-olds could take out a king, with this type of technology. So what happened is people who wanted to protect their positions of power, people that had gathered a lot of knowledge and understanding about humans and humanity and history, try to keep all that stuff to themselves. And if they realize they can continue having this power over other human beings through mental manipulations of all types. So if you can keep people feeling bad about themselves and thinking they're not worthy and fighting with each other, they can't really quite unite to defeat you if you're a king or a ruler. And the other thing is, kings and rulers and people that want power over others, they had to make a subtle change in their tactics, because the old tactics aren't going to work. Now we have guns. So you can't just do it the way it used to be done. That kind of was, I feel like the world kind of saw that in some of the past wars, where you get enough people with guns and it's a standstill. Like look at World War I and World War II. You got miles and miles of pits dug, and it was a standoff. They'd move 100 feet in one direction, then 100 feet back the next day. You could bomb them, they could bomb you. The wars just went on and on until something different had to be tried, and in every case, because you can't just all out destroy people or take their stuff, because there's always an effect to that. And that's kind of like the natural law principle aspect of this, where if we look at it, if we look at the psychology of the situation, anybody who's an aggressor over a period of time who gets recognized as being such is going to face, people are going to realize that you're beating up on innocent people or you're doing something wrong over a period of time. But in our modern world, there's so many methods of obfuscation, of hiding the evils, of justifying the evils, is the most common and the biggest priority, what we need to bring up in discussion. So, boy, it took me a long time to get around to that point of what is the priority. So let's get back to our list. We make a list of problems that humans are dealing with. Okay, we're dealing with people homeless, not having homes. We're dealing with people hungry, not having food. We're dealing with people fighting over trivial things like, people fighting over things that are not trivial. Water usage, water rights, land usage, land rights, freedom to travel, freedom to speak, all these things people fight over argue over, and they're big issues, right? We got, a lot of people are convinced in the modern time that the biggest problem out there right now is ecological concerns, that our Earth, the planet itself, that nature is somehow either crumbling or under such stress that it's, we're wrecking it. And it's hard to get a real big picture view of that and to know who to listen to on that. But I do recognize the truth that humans have really been disrespecting nature for quite some time. But in my mind, when I weigh the problems, I look at human slavery. Okay, there's right now a vast network, similar to what we saw in the Epstein revelation, that there's a vast network of Satanists who are in positions of power all over the world. Maybe they're not all self-proclaimed Satanists, but, their actions show that that's what they are, because they're trafficking humans and children and, whatever kind of drug they need to raise money for their operations, they will justify these type of actions. And all these networks of evil are supported through governments, United Nations, various groups that people think are somehow good or necessary, but they're actually the worst thing of all. So what should be our priority as individuals on the day-to-day? I think it's good and important to look for little ways in your life to better respect the planet, to not throw garbage on the ground, try to recycle. All these things are great, right? But those are like, in terms of priorities, they're not the things that are really going to make the biggest difference in future generations of children. If we go on accepting the type of behavior that we have been, where, it's perfectly legitimate to lock somebody up for a crime on a law that doesn't hurt anyone, for instance, generations and generations of people keep enslaving themselves and being part of this huge negative thing, rather than, it's one thing to have some litter and some problems. There's another thing to have human slavery. Realistically, when you think about it, it only takes a moment to realize a thing. If a person were to realize thing and be able to just instantly share that realization with another person, we could all realize all this stuff about freedom in a moment all over the world, if it was as easy as just sharing the information with another person. The real problem, the real crux of the problem, is that there's been such a psychological job done on the humanity, the minds of people, that you can point at something and say, that's wrong, that's evil. And a lot of people are going to say, no, it's not, it's fine. Things just have to be that way. But what we have done as a race of people is created a system of evil that involves convincing people from their very birth, in so many ways, that it's acceptable to submit to authorities, that it's acceptable for people to manipulate your physical body and your mental psyche from the moment you're born, from, removing parts of your body to telling you what to think, telling you what not to think, and forcing you into various small boxes, cubicles, desks, rows, aisles, like really kind of trying to turn the human being into a pig that fits in a hole, right? A social construct that's been created, written in books by, I'm sure very intelligent people, but they came up with a plan like, oh, this is how society would work better. This is how we should do it. And then you got people like world gangsters with lots and lots of money, family dynasties, and they invest a lot of money in one of these plans, and they start instituting it all over the world through all these organizations that look like they're doing good things, but really they're pushing their agenda of ownership of how things are going to go in the future. And I guess some of these people think they're doing the right thing, but the mistaken thinking across the board is the same problem that we're discussing. And that problem is humans thinking that it's okay for one human to own another human being, or own their labor, or own their time without permission even. But even with permission, that's never going to be okay in a free world. So as individuals, we work towards the future we want to see by first understanding the situation, right? By first having a good gauge of what's happening, okay? So if a person thinks that the current situation it was really exemplified during the pandemic, with all these government officials and health officials all going along with something they couldn't prove, they didn't really have evidence for, and yet instituting preemptively attacks on the normal people, making people stay inside, threatening them with fines or jail, or being separated from their loved ones, even in hospitals, to the point where grandchildren and children couldn't see their grandparents and parents, even if they were dying, like trumping up this level of bullshit that there was never really good, true, solid facts to back it up. It was propaganda all over the world. And people weren't able to see through this because they still have this idea in their head that everything is as it should be, and that, most of the world is working from a positive place of trying to help others and trying to make the world a better place. And people want to believe in the best, and I get that. Like, I try to be an optimist myself, but are governments really trying to help people? Are they conscious? Do they have a consciousness that knows the difference between right and wrong like we can on an individual basis? Or when you get involved with a bigger entity, like a commercial company that's making money, or a giant conglomeration of people loosely connected called the government, who are all getting paid for what they're doing, a higher wage than most people, by the way, with more security than your average person. You have this differential where you have all these people that are, making a little better money and have a little better security, and they get to go sit in their office every day, but they're willing to collect money from the rest of us who have been working our ass off the whole life just to put food on the table, right? And you got these lazy cats that want to sit back and just profit off of your hard work. Or people that aren't lazy, that are hard workers, and they really feel like they're doing something good for humanity, but they just can't see the crack in the logic that if your money is coming from somebody else's hard work and they didn't give that to you freely, that's actually stealing. And a lot of folks, I've been able to kind of break it down a step at a step until they will finally admit that, yeah, I guess in a way, taxes is stealing, but, how else are we going to do it, kind of thing. Like they don't have a better solution in their mind, and that's the way things are, so why talk about it? Why see a better way, And here's the reason. Because that very type of thinking, that very complacency is what's keeping us in this systematic routine of enslaving one another. And here's one way it can be seen. Look in our relationships, how we treat one another. Like if you've been in relationships, like childhood, for instance, a lot of us, our parents weren't in the best shape, and they fought or beat on each other, or, got drunk every night. Whatever they did, they created like a trauma in our life. And then we grow up, and our natural tendency is to reenact all those traumatic events and try to figure out how to make it right. But so often people never get to the making it right part. They just reenact the trauma over and over. One example of this, I remember starting junior high in 6th grade, and the 8th grade boys would look out for the 6th grade boys, and they would like walk up behind you and smack you in the back of the head or knock your hat off. And I remember when I got to 7th grade and 8th grade, I made a firm decision that I wasn't going to repeat that shit. Like I really didn't like it when somebody did that to me. So why would I go do that to someone else? And in the same way, like nobody likes getting taxed or fined or sued, especially when there's this feeling deep down of like, do I really deserve this? Like I'm just working hard. I'm just doing my thing. I'm not taking things from people. I'm not, bombing countries or enslaving people or putting people in a box or a prison. I'm just living my life, right? And yet somebody can pull you over on the road for going a few miles too fast, or you're a little light on your license plate or something, and they can just rape your money right out of your pocket or else. And, people will argue with me there. They'll say, oh, we need a system of rules. We need laws. How else? Otherwise, everything would be crazy. Everyone just do whatever they want. And like, I totally understand that fear. It's a natural fear. In the world we're in, everybody's used to having all these barriers in place. Handrails is a good example. If you live somewhere that has handrails next to a cliff, you get really used to those handrails being there, and you can walk right along the cliff and the handrail's there. If all of a sudden one day somebody removed that handrail, like you feel kind of nervous walking down that same way. You'd be like, man, there's no handrail here anymore. I could just slip right off the edge. I better walk a little further away, So in a lot of ways, people see these rules and laws as a safety net because they know that there's crazy people out there. They watch TV. They know there's psychopaths. There's people that kill people that don't have emotions and empathy. So, like having someone you can call that will show up seems like a good answer. But, like out here where I live is a good example. I've heard stories from people I know personally that have had a really intense incident going on their property or where they're at, and they call the police and they don't show up for an hour and a half, 2 hours, if at all. So, like realistically, most people in their life don't actually have protection that they can just call if they're in personal danger. The police or the judges or the system in place might help, after the fact to sue someone or jail someone who did something wrong. But in the moment, you really have no recourse. And in fact, if you employ your own personal self-defense in a situation where you're being attacked, you stand a good chance of going to jail yourself or facing really large fines, even if it was totally 100% self-defense. And that's how whacked our world and silly laws are, that they will respect, these laws will respect words on a paper over a conscious human being who is extremely more valuable than words on a piece of paper. And lying is pretty commonplace. People just accept that, for instance, politicians are going to lie. That's just taken for granted, And they just do that, right? But we should just let that be and keep living with that situation. Only time we really change things in life is when something becomes intolerable to us or we have a vision or a mission or a passion that overrides the obstacles that we're facing. So we have to want a better world. We have to imagine a better world, which means not being complacent with the one we're in, which means prioritizing these problems I'm talking about, humanity's problems. We do have a problem with our fuel, right? We're dependent on gasoline and propane. That's not good. Is that the number one biggest problem for humanity? No, because how does that compare to enslaving one another and making someone else your bitch and they have to do everything for you from the time they're born? You know, we don't look at it as slavery because in our society we feel like, oh, I'm free. I'm just out walking around and I can do whatever I want. I'm not a slave. But we don't realize that even if we have some semblance of freedom, we're still trapped with the money-based debt. And 99% of the world does not have that little freedom that you and I have. For those of us here in a nice place in America, and we can, you know, travel pretty freely. But wait till you try to get on a plane and see how they treat you, right? Try to get on any kind of transportation that will take you across border lines, and you're going to have people treating you like you're the criminal of all time, like you don't deserve to not be searched, like you don't deserve to not be patted down. You know, like your body isn't really yours. It's theirs to search as they please because you're going to ride on their contraption. And someone else made rules, large groups of people made rules that apply to you that you may or may not agree with at all. So priority for humanity, from my point of view, at this point of time, is to deal with this slavery problem. And, you know, the other problems, how we treat animals, how we treat the earth, our emotional problems, all those have to be dealt with too. But they're not the first priority from my point of view. The first priority from my point of view is dealing with this slavery problem. So how does that translate into who we are and our self-work? Well, we're dealing with a situation where almost everyone around us doesn't understand this problem, doesn't see this problem, and will react negatively when we explain this problem because they have become so rooted and accustomed to things they are and the way they are, and they may even be profiting off of it. Like, for instance, when I had a job where I worked for the court system and I was receiving a nice check every week and getting money set aside for my future. And it wasn't until I really analyzed where that money came from and really sunk in just how much people were suffering in that court system and the way people were being treated in my community before I realized how wrong it was to accept that money and to keep using it. And so I stopped doing that, you know, and I think when more people kind of like are honest with themselves and faced with this real priority that we're talking about, that, you know, number one priority here is dealing with the slavery problem. Everything else is secondary until we deal with that. And I think if we do the inner work it takes to kind of like recognize where value really is, recognize the importance of our morality and our choices of right and wrong, down to how we create our societies and how we treat one another, a lot of those other things, like how we treat nature and how we treat animals and what we eat, those things are going to start making more sense too. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, of course, right? If we don't enslave each other, we probably shouldn't treat animals like slaves either. Should we? Should we even treat plants like slaves? Oh, you know, those are things we can deal with down the line. But we need to start with priority number one, like the biggest deal, right? So I guess it concludes today's, this week's message. Going forward, I want to encourage and motivate whoever is listening to these productions to constantly, like every day, all the time, be teaching and learning and looking for opportunities to have these conversations with people. Be looking for opportunities yourself to express through your own mind and spirit how these subjects hit you and how they, in your own words for folks, until we all I don't know how many times I've said these things and had these conversations about truth, about freedom, about natural law, about true care. And every time we have these conversations, new words are used, new concepts come up, and new realization, ways of looking at it, ways of saying it, ways of explaining to others. We just have to keep chiseling away at this problem. And we definitely need you, whoever you are, because there's not enough of us working on this issue. That's why it's hard for people to take it seriously. I think most people think that, I don't know if they really believe it, but kind of accept truth based on how many people agree with it, which is a terrible way to discern truth. But, it is easier to accept something when there's a lot more people saying it and doing it. It just kind of works better that way. So, we need everyone we can get. And something I've kind of realized is maybe this is all we got, Maybe the people who are creating content right now and talking about freedom, natural law, and who stood up against all the bullshit, maybe that's all of us. And if that's the case, we got to work harder at networking, banding together, sharing each other's work, whatever it takes to leave some kind of legacy for the next generation. We'll pick up where we left off, Worst case, best case would be we really start turning the tide in the next few years here, or months or days. But, it's a big project, so I don't want to lead us towards disappointment. I do want to encourage and motivate you to do more than doing now, and myself. That's why I make these videos. Sometimes I listen to my own self talking. Damn, I need to do that. I need to listen to my own words. And that's, when we put our word out into the world, it's like magic. We create things. We open the doors and the possibilities for things happening by speaking them into existence. So join me, friends. Communicate with other content creators and myself. Create content yourself, or go out in public and meet people, and maybe start a workshop, lead a hike, and make it based on natural law or freedom, truth, something like that. Keep studying, keep learning, keep teaching. Name of the game. All right, friends, I'm gonna check out.